What's up, guys? How's it going?
It's going well. How's
Going
everything
well?
with you,
Doing
Joe?
great.
Doing good. Doing good. So on the show today, we have Ryan and Paul from Zenlytic. I guess for the audience out there, since it's audio only, it's going to give it it might be a bit confusing to who's who. So, Ryan, why don't you introduce yourself first?
Yeah, I'm Ryan. One of the co-founders and the CEOs on Zenlytic.
Nice.
And I'm Paul, one of the co-founders and CTO of Zenlytic.
Okay. CEO and CTO. Nice, nice, nice. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I actually had the fortune of hanging out with Paul a few weeks ago, actually in Denver. And then I was like, cool. Let's seemed like you guys are working on some really interesting stuff in the BI space, and so I figured might as well have a chat. I guess my first question to y'all is: the BI space is insanely crowded with a lot of companies. Like, why did you decide to start a company in the BI space?
So I think two reasons. The first and probably most important being naivete. You just don't realize how much is actually involved in building a BI tool. So had we known at the outset how much is involved, we may not have gone down the road. But nevertheless, we're here. And the second reason is, although equally important, which is we really think like large language models are an actual platform shift. Like that is, the way I think about sort of the BI market is that it's generally driven by like fundamental technology shifts. So, you had OLAP cubes way back in the day when technologically that was all you could do. Tableau came in and gave you the ability to, with this like in-memory index they were running to like make dashboards filterable and all this other really powerful stuff. Then when you had a cloud data warehouse, all of a sudden semantic layer powered tools like Looker just became incredible because you could join all these things together with these massive tables. And outside of running up your cloud bill, you could look at stuff just instantly that previously took forever to actually look at.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the next big wave is actually large language models, which will mint a new winner like, what was previously Looker.
Well, now this week Apple announced the new Vision Pro, so now you're going to have to do spatial computing too.
Yeah, and we'll have to hop back into crypto when that becomes a thing again.
Well, Brian's in Miami, so got a head start on that one.
That's right.
It's really funny how Paul mentioned how hard it is to build a BI tool. That totally sums up our experience too, which is like, there's like I used to be an investor. There's like an old investor saying where it's like, never try to build an ERP tool because it's just too hard and too complicated. And, we didn't realize that also extends to BI, which is also just a really complicated thing to build. It's talking about the crowdedness of the market though. It's funny because even though it's a big crowded market, we didn't really stress too much about that because I mean, first off, nothing had changed that much in BI for many years as we were entering it. Like the same big incumbents kind of been around for a while, and I'd say if anything, there was actually starting to be a bit of a vacuum where like some of the there've been a bunch of acquisitions, and some of the acquisitions were sort of like the old guard was sort of taking focus and being pulled in different directions. So it was kind of surprisingly like a bit of a phantom opportunity there, I think.
Interesting. And tell me more about that. Like, how did you perceive that opportunity in the market, right? So, because at least in the the business I am in, consulting less and less these days, but the when you talk to companies about their BI needs, right? It's like, oh well, I can go to Power BI, I can go to Tableau, I could use Excel. And that's the paradigm people are in, right? I want to look at charts, I want to look at tables. That's it. And it seems to be a very established mental model for, I guess, quote, looking at data. Right? How did you see this gap?
So I think the gap that we're really trying to go after is like self-service, basically, is being able, because the problem that we're really solving is not just showing you some data in a table or showing you data in a plot. I'd say, if anything, that's probably the weakest part of our product. The part where it's exceptionally good and hopefully makes up for its lacking some plots is getting you that data. So, right now, most of that actually happens via an email to an analyst. Someone goes in, shoots an email to an analyst and says, hey, can you give me blah, 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 blah. If you can take that getting it for them process and at least take 75% of the really rote questions that aren't quite on a dashboard, but the business user can't really quite get to, and make that process actually happen automatically, then I think that's really what we're going after.
Yeah, one of the funny things that I've always noticed about BI is that there's a lot of moving the goalposts around what self-serve means.
Yeah, tell me about that. I keep hearing about self-service, like I'm at a buffet, and I can't seem to ever get what I want. So,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
a problem when the buffet has 1,000 tables in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? It's funny. Like every time I sort of onboard to a new tool in the past, I'd be like, all right, it's like this looks really cool. It's self-serve, but then a lot of the times it would kind of be like, oh, you can view these pre-built dashboards, or the really, really like beefy ones, like, oh yeah, you can add a little bit of filtering, a little bit of slicing, and some predefined OLAP cubes and things like that. And I guess I'm of the belief that BI tools are, despite the messaging to the contrary, I think BI as an industry is generally by analysts for analysts, in the sense that, a lot of the times to start using a Tableau workflow, you're writing a SQL query, for instance. Like if you're using Power BI, you're going to learn DAX, and like there's a more technical set of requirements, I guess, than they like to let on. So like I've always thought that it's that's the most common thing, because it's actually hard to do otherwise, and it might not even be possible to do otherwise until LLMs came out. But I think the really valuable side of things is when you can get data in the hands of a domain expert very, very quickly. And that's what I think BI should look like, I guess, which is the motivation for why we're doing what we're doing. I don't know. You have anything else to add there, Paul?
I would say I think one of the real leading products was Looker in this, because there's inherent complexity in data, right? Where it's like, oh, business users like, hey, how many active users did this? And it's like, well, what's a user and what's active? And what's this? So there's just like a lot of complexity that needs to happen, that needs to really be taken care of by technical people, because it's just complicated. And Looker had the wisdom to say, hey, you can make the end user part of it really easy if you just push some of that complexity to the analysts who know what they're doing, who can do that one time, and then make that easier next time for the business users trying to get that information.
Yeah, and I think when Looker came onto the scene, it was definitely a breath of fresh air, so to speak, with respect to how you could slice and dice. I mean, to me, that was the first, I guess, modern example of whatever you want to call a semantic layer. Obviously, it's very coupled to the BI tool, but it still was I think, an attempt to decouple definitions from the underlying database. And that was, I think, a monumental step forward. But then, I don't know, as things happen at companies, things happened with Looker. And so, I'm a huge Looker fanboy. I'll be frank and say I'm not as stoked on where things have gone over the past few years, but it is what it is, how the cookie crumbles. So, but again,
they really
big opportunities.
Oh yeah, they pushed the bar forward on what was possible for sure. With semantic layering, I think a lot of the developments that have happened in the modern data stack can be traced back. I mean, Looker catalyzed, I think, a lot of that with some of their innovations. So very impressed with what they've achieved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it's given rise, I think, to this notion of quote modern BI, because up to that point, right, everything was you had your BI team, and then you have to do that, and I don't know, just a lot of friction, right? A lot of friction. So, but kind of where do you guys want to go, though? Say large language models. I mean, so walk me through, like, what's your vision of what that world looks like? Say, what's the interface if I'm an end user? If I'm an expert, like, how do I get my data more quickly?
Yeah, so I think there's two sides of it. One is the creation and sort of management of the semantic layer, which I think LLMs broadly will be immensely useful for. Like everything from creating like the sort of transformation, like DBT stuff for you, to helping define the metrics, all that kind of stuff. The actual setup will be a lot easier, and the maintenance. But then the other side where we get really, really excited is once you have a lot of those definitions, even in a tool like Looker right now where you have those definitions, it's just complicated. There's a lot going on. It's not clear if you should look at revenue by the created at date or the processed at date. And, it's just those kind of questions where a business user pops in and they see 3 different date options and it's like, okay, maybe I should email somebody. So the LLM has context on everything that people have asked about, all the definitions, how the definitions are used in dashboards, how, people generally ask about the definitions. You can tune it to make it, respond in certain ways if you have certain, maybe different than average use cases. And, that allows you to take this really complex, really kind of high dimensional, like semantic layer and make it accessible to someone who would just see 1,000 metrics and be like, okay, I'm gonna email somebody.
It's really key. So I used to we used to be a Looker partner and did a lot of Looker implementations. And what I would always find was, I think because people are so, well, there's a couple things. With Looker, you can make as many, measures and dimensions as you want, which is a blessing and a curse. And it gets overwhelming for business users to the point where they'll do exactly what you said, which is email and say, like, I need just make this report. I need it to look like this. I'm like, cool. So we're back to where we just started. Like the entire purpose of you using this tool was so you could slice and dice everything. And now we're back to, me in this case being a consultant having to do the work for you. And it made me cry inside because it was like, okay, so obviously, whoever implemented this or sold it to you didn't, explain the real power behind this, right? And so I think it's a huge opportunity that was lost, really. Because I think at that time, the interface could have changed the mental model of how we look at BI, and instead we just look at it again like just reports as always, right? So, yeah. The context is key, though. What you said, that's like the missing piece. The missing piece. Yeah.
Because most of those questions about what should I ask about can be solved if you're willing to look at 10 different dashboards and see, okay, well, in this one that I normally look at turns by this date, which means that it probably should be by the other date and, this other way. So it's like, it's you could solve it if you were willing to just do a mind-numbing amount of looking at stuff, which large language models are great at looking at a mind-numbing amount of stuff and, doing the common things.
Yeah, I think one of the major misconceptions that I think data people think about their end users are, the end users are less technical, but I don't think that's the big hurdle to overcome. I think that the end users are just very, very busy, and they're being just like everyone else. They're being pulled in a million different directions, and when you're a big data geek and this stuff is fascinating for you, it's easy to dig in and start really learning more and get excited about learning more about the tools, but the people that build these tools, they often forget that the average person doesn't have that same level of passion for this stuff. They just want to get to their answer as quickly as possible, right? I think one of the big mistakes that tools have made so far is that they're generally built, tech first. So it's like, here's what the capabilities of the technology are, instead of like, human first. It's like, here's what people, our end users need to actually access this very easily. And even just simple stuff like case in point, I'm sure you've seen in Looker deployments, people get stuck up on logging in, they can't find their password, and that's too much work. And selecting explorers, there's all sorts of little things that could have very easily been polished out of that experience. And that's actually one of the best experiences, to date, that could make that so much more seamless for the end user.
Makes a lot of sense.
And I guess to your question as well, I think the real next step in that is what Paul's talking about is, being, there's a natural amount of friction, for example, when you have complex data systems with thousands of metrics, dimensions, and things like that. So I guess our vision, going back to your original question, is we have a great North Star, which is basically making the BI tool feel like that conversation with the analyst.
Was that the vision you started out with?
So we've always had a language component, but we're not magicians. Like we didn't predict exactly all of this was going to happen. So I would say like we started out with cool features around language and around explaining like the why of changes happened. I would say we had a really big moment when we actually moved, and this was like a big learning on our part, when we moved from a sort of ThoughtSpot, if you will, kind of approach where it's like search, because that's sort of what our language component looked like. To what reality is, which is a conversation. It's like someone asks something that is totally not even a question yet. and you need to be able to kind of work with them to like tease out what exactly is it that you're looking for here. So it's like a classic example. Someone's like, well, what are my best marketing channels? Like, where should I spend more money? And it's like, well, lots of different things you could look at for that. These are some options. These are some things you could look at. What would you like? And then even with just a little sort of push like that, the end user can simply say, oh yeah, well, I was thinking revenue, or I was thinking return on ad spend, or I was thinking, whatever it is. And then you finally get to something that you can actually answer with data.
I guess, what was that epiphany for you? In full disclosure, Ternary is thoughts about partner, and do a lot of done some podcasts with them and stuff. We're friends, but I always felt like their search interface was, so you had to put things in a correct order, otherwise it wouldn't. Well, you could put it in a different order, you just get a very strange answer. But the conversational piece, right? Like, that's something I think people have talked about for a long time. Like, yeah, it'd be great if I could converse with my data and all this stuff. But like, what was the catalyst for you making that leap from sort of more of a quasi kind of rules based, interface to something where it's like very organic conversational chat?
I think honestly, it was like when GPT-3 came out and we were able to like see how good it was, and just like, it was like, man, you could even feed this thing the previous question, and it would then infer the context, right? It's like, you could say, can you get me this? Or can you get me, marketing channels and, how much I spend in them? And then you could say, now do campaigns. And it's like obvious that you want to look at spend by campaign, but it's like, that's actually like they basically got intelligent enough that you could just give it essentially what you asked previously, and it would be able to sort of synthesize for you like what this person is actually trying to get to. And that was a moment where it was like, this is like pretty game changing. The fact that you can just carry that context, like just like a human would in an email thread. And yeah, that's kind of the part where it was like, wow, we can actually do this.
So Paul and I actually, we first met, we were doing master's degrees together in AI when it was the year that the attention is all you need paper came out, which is kind of posited the transformer model, which is what powers.
It was. Yeah,
that's great.
And, exactly. So we got very excited by that because we happened to be in academia studying at the time, and we always knew that these language models would be a part of what we're building. So like we've shoehorned all of the most basic models all the way up into GPT up to and including GPT-4. But it's funny because you mentioned hard coding stuff, and there's this this Richard Sutton paper, the Bitter Lesson. It's kind of like it's all about AI and in general, but it's very true for LLMs. And he kind of says that like a lot of these approaches, you hard code these rules in, and that gives you a tiny little short-term bump. But in the long run, just sort of better and better models and more compute and more data are what sort of win the game. And in the early days of us incorporating these language models, when they weren't as well performing as they are now, we had to hard code a lot of stuff. And we were always trying, all right, let's try and fix this, let's try and correct that. And you're right, the very first performance, you'd ask a question, you kind of had to ask it like it was SQL that wasn't quite SQL, right? And then it just evolves from there. But I think, as Paul says, the real watershed moment for us was, the advent of these, basically the OpenAI models, the large language GPT models, and everything that's come beyond that has been a step change in comprehension, and has unlocked for the end user. It's not only improved quality, but it's also unlocked the ability to jump from a single question into a chat.
Mm-hmm. That was a good early insight too, because I remember if you're really nerdy, you're probably dorking around with like GPT-3 when that came out. What was it, 2020 or something like that? So it was like the COVID thing, right? I think about must have been around the spring. Like, I remember a lot of us are gathered around virtually, like, nerding out on GPT-3 because what else are you going to do with your spare time? So there's but it wasn't like every BI vendor was suddenly like, hey, or every vendor was suddenly like, hey, we're gonna have a large language model interfaces. Right now, it's like the zeitgeist, and every company seems to be incorporating into the workflow. But that was a very early insight that you guys had. I would say that's pretty cool. So yeah.
Oh. We're excited to see where the technology's headed. I think I think we're still I mean, I think even the foundation models have a long ways that we're going to take them, and it's just at the pace it's going, it seems to be moving very quickly. But the thing that excites me is absolutely everyone right now is incorporating this tech in some way or another, and not even just in like our industry or in the data industry, but like everyone's building
Everywhere,
stuff for this, right? And it just feels like we're in the top of the first for like we have this new sort of gift, this new technology has been given to everyone, and like I'm so excited to see all the ways that gets implemented. And it's going to take years to ultimately disseminate into everyday tools, but I think the impact is going to be very, very big, and I'm super excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, and I think you could cut off the actual development of the models like right now. Like if nothing else got better at all, which is not the case, like they will improve, but if nothing else got better, just it would take like 5 years to disseminate all of the sort of newfound power into actual workflows that people have, right? Because there's just so many boring, mind-numbing, the equivalent of washing dishes kind of workflows that humans have to do in big enterprises right now. And just the sheer amount of human time from moving data from one Excel file to another, or just punching things in systems that humans won't have to do is just absurdly exciting.
Well, I was talking earlier today with a friend of mine about how large language models it might be the catalyst that we need to accelerate efforts on data quality, for example. Because until now, right, data quality and governance and so forth, and all these things that we always say we're going to do, but we never get around to it because it's like telling people to floss their teeth and go exercise every day. It's like, yeah, I'll do that. Like, never. I do floss my teeth, by the way, but the other people, though, them. No, but seriously, it might be one of the forcing functions that the broader industry needs as well to get its act together in terms of making sure the data has integrity, right? Because you put these foundational models on top of crappy data. I don't know. Surprise! Guess what you're going to get out of it? Really crappy answers that you think are real, and so.
I think that's spot on. And there's actually two really interesting trends that are happening now that I think they've been separate until now, but I think when they come together, it's going to be really interesting. One is you've probably seen those code interpreter demos.
Yep.
And this is the new GPT plugin where people are uploading a CSV and it runs a whole pandas analysis on it, which is kind of neat, with high contextual understanding of the data frame and everything. The other thing that's happening is increased context windows. And, we've seen Anthropic has gone to 100,000 tokens now. And that's special because it's very good at finding needles in haystacks. And like, they did it with unstructured data, but they uploaded the Great Gatsby, into a single query, which you can do with 100,000 tokens in the entire book, except they had changed one line where Nick Carraway, they described him as an ML engineer working for Anthropic.
Oh,
and then they asked Claude, the model, they said, well, is there anything unusual about this book? And Claude actually pointed it out. It's like, well, this book is set in the 1920s. There's no way that Nick Carraway could have been, and he actually spotted, the machine spotted that hidden within that 100,000, token query. So you can imagine once you get the ability to understand and write code with that level of comprehension, with that sort of, large data sets are going to be bigger than that. But like as that context window size increases as well, when those come together, I think there's a lot of really interesting things that are going to happen for data cleanliness and a lot of implications there.
And the implications largely being that if you don't do it, you will get bitten really, really fast instead of, a year later after you've already moved on to a different company. So like you said, the forcing function is that your mistakes will become visible very quickly as opposed to becoming visible 6 months after you've left.
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I'm excited to see where those trends go. Yeah, it's I'll have to ponder that. I'm gonna go dig into what Anthropic did after this. That sounds really, really cool. I guess one thing is like what we talked about what large language models can do. Like what can't they do?
So I think the most important thing from our perspective for what they can't do is that they can't guarantee that they're going to do something the same way every time. They're sort of inherently non-deterministic. But when you're looking at something like active users or revenue, you really need it to be deterministic. Like it's gotta, do what it says it's going to do. So the thing I think that they struggle at and would be very hard is that if you're trying to use them in some sort of text to SQL kind of situation, it's great if you know SQL and it just is a faster way to write SQL and you can catch the mistakes and fix them. But if you don't know SQL and you're asking it for something and it's guessing at a SQL statement, it might be right, it might be wrong. But if you're going to share that number to the board, you've got to be sure that it's right. You've got to have some sort of guarantee. And obviously humans have an error rate themselves, but one of the advantages of these semantic layer tools like a Looker is that you've got a definition. And that definition may or may not be right, but it is at least consistent. And, being able to consistently serve the right stuff is something that they just can't do natively. And they need tools built around them that can support that.
Yeah. Two other things they can't do. One thing I don't think they'll do for a long time is have the machine uprising, and I feel like a lot of those concerns are very, very, very overblown. So I'm not worried about that. I think these are just very powerful tools. The other interesting thing, actually, and it's a broad statement, so it depends on the domain. But I think people tend to overfocus on the quality aspects of these model outputs, and they don't focus enough on the speed. And what I mean by that is if you go and ask, Jasper or whatever to write you a poem or a short story or a blog post, it's probably not going to be as good as what a very good poet or a good novelist or a good thought leader could do if you're a domain expert, right? So like off the shelf, it's not going to be about quality, but what it really does is it makes people able to act with their level of quality much faster. And it's like, just like in our last example, we were talking about, Paul was saying, hey, you can improve your feedback loop. And you can figure out really quickly if you're doing something wrong. If you get some bad data in there, you're going to, hear about that immediately instead of 6 months from now. And like, I think we're going to see a lot of applications of that where it's helping people work faster. Our engineering team can probably work, I don't know, what do you think, Paul, 25, 30% faster, thanks to Copilot. But it's not as good of a developer as anyone on our team. So it's really more about time than quality, I would say, is sort of a roundabout way of answering what they can't do. I'd say time is more important at this point.
I guess it depends on what you mean by time and quality too. Like for what I do, which is, writing and pontificating anymore and navel gazing and stuff, it's like ChatGPT is good, I think, at providing, say, like an outline of something, but I 100% of the time I find myself actually spending more time going through and editing it versus if I just did it myself. So I think it provides a good overall structure for certain things, not for everything. And I think it just it totally depends on what you're trying to do, right? Like if you want to have an outline for like a term paper or something like that, something that's more routine, then it's like or shit, if you just wanted to write your term paper for you, I guess you could have it do that too. But if you're trying to come up with like, I'm making a course right now, right? And it's like, okay, maybe it could help me generate a script. And in some cases it did fairly okay. Then in other cases I'm like, absolutely not. Like this is because it doesn't have the context of the ideas, and a lot of the ideas are original, so it'd be impossible for it to know, right? So yeah. So I think it's like so in that case I'm slower, but you're discovering. I'm discovering where it works. You're discovering where it works. So.
And it's funny. Like I feel like there's a trend of it's true across use cases broadly. Actually, like it started off in programming where people kind of realized that you could ask ChatGPT or GPT-4 to write sort of like function level stuff, like a handful of lines, but asking it to write a page of code, you'd probably spend more time debugging that had you versus just writing it yourself. And like you said, it's kind of interesting. Like your use case there, you get an outline and maybe focus on paragraph level instead of sort of overall document level. And like there's a certain window size. Like it seems like it's kind of like about the size of a paragraph where it can produce really good stuff, and that's about the point when a human should get involved again, right? And I guess that's way. Also.
Well, with
the
code
other hidden
too.
implication.
And it produces okay looking code. I mean, but if you let it, I guess it's like anything, right? Like children or dogs or something, where you give them, you don't put your child on a leash, but I put my dog on one. So it's like there's certain boundaries. Is what I'm saying, right? Where you at least sort of the extent to where you can go with these things. And I think you're absolutely right, Ryan. Where the shorter is better. It's able to maybe
Human in
quote
the loop.
focus more. Human in the loop, yeah, for sure. Yeah, at a certain point, it just gets unwieldy, and I'm like, yeah. But it's funny because a lot of even like senior staff level engineers I know are using Copilot right now.
Oh yeah. And I think that's because it's like when you're using it at that, doing a few lines, you've got something repetitive to write, it just bam, 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 bam. It's so much faster than anything you could do. And it's all the rote stuff. It's like it's not going to figure out the complicated stuff, just like in your writing, right? We were talking about this when we were getting beers. It's like, you can just look at a blog post and be like, yeah, ChatGPT wrote this. It doesn't have a soul,
Yeah.
And it's like you can just tell. But it's like if you're using the tool appropriately, it's going to have the soul. It's going to have the kernel. And then it's just helping you like finish out the obvious ending to that sentence by tabbing instead of writing it yourself, And it's like, then I think the big like split for me, and like this is mostly in coding, where it's like there's some level of it doing stuff for you that's like amazing autocomplete and just like turbocharges you. And then there's some level that turns you into basically like the code reviewer, and you're just kind of like going through someone else's code, being like, did they make some like sneaky mistake here? And it's like, as long as you can be the owner, like the creator of it, then, it's amazing. It like turbocharges you like crazy. But if you just turn to like reviewing someone else's crappy stuff, it actually might be worse.
Well, it might be worse, yeah, because it's kind of like code reviewing, like the drunk interns work.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, I don't even know where you put the SQL statement in this code here. This is crazy. Just writing a Go or something. So it's interesting.
It's funny though, because like one of like the oldest examples we have of like machine intelligence or whatever, for lack of a better word, is like back when we were solving chess with computers. And in Deep Lippy, Kasparov, and there's like there's that whole race basically, and at least until recently, I don't know if this is still turned out, but at least until recently, of course computers can beat humans pretty soundly at chess, but the very best chess players or chess entities in the world was actually like a combination of a human and a computer.
Yeah,
it's called like a centaur, and they used to have centaur chess where the way it worked is the computer would make most of the moves and the human would kind of supervise until they had some sort of intuition domain type thing and like, nope, we shouldn't do that, and the human had the power to override the computer. And that was actually, for a long time, that combination could actually beat, the best human, of course, but also the best computer. And I don't know if that's the case or not anymore. It might be. But I think there's a cool lesson there too, where like, I think as we see other domains, whether it's coding or whether it's document generation or whether it's art or whatever, right? I think we're going to see this, computer human combination are going to outperform both of those individually.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, Google ended that one with, or DeepMind, I think, ended that with one of the reinforcement learning strategies. But that was true for a long time.
It might not be true anymore, but I'm not sure. I think the point remains, though. At least for a long time, it'll probably follow the same trajectory for all this other stuff too, right? Like all the language stuff. There might be a point when the computer is actually better than the human plus the computer, but for the foreseeable future, I think we still got those centaurs.
You're also talking about chess, which is like a closed, not like closed form in the sense that it's solvable, but like a closed system. You don't have like random people bumping into you in chess. It's like the pieces are on the board and there's like a definite set of moves you can make. So the real world is a lot more complicated because
I would think that because chess, I mean, there's a winner and a loser, but in life, it's not so clear cut typically. But what I could see is like if it helps you make better decisions at the end of the day, right? Or if it's able to aid you in producing better outcomes, like that's how I would evaluate personally the success of these things. If it helps, it helps. If it hurts, it hurts. And to me, that's sort of the bottom line. And you just got to know the difference and not blindly, apply these techniques just because it's AI, right? I mean, I wouldn't apply, an AI chess algorithm to my daily decision making. Like whether they go walk my dog or not, that'd be like utterly stupid. So like I could ask her if she wants that, but yeah. But yeah, I think it's, I don't know, it'll be interesting. I mean, and I can see this kind of going two ways. Either it helps enhance our decision-making process and our outcomes, or, the one of the things I wrote many months ago on LinkedIn was one of my big concerns is, like search engine optimization got really, really popular when the web came out. Like I remember doing this with web pages early on. There are easy ways to scam it. You could like write text and like hide the color of it, and that was one way you can get to the top of a search ranking. And it's just a cat and mouse game. But nowadays, SEO is a big business. And my concern with large language models is, okay, so like if it's just going to crawl things blindly, well, if I'm a company, if I'm maybe in SEO, for example, I am going to start nefariously putting out stuff that'll get crawled by all these AI models, and so because why not? That's a big concern, because then because the issue is like, unlike Google, where it'll present you with a bunch of an ordered list of links, as well as lots of ads these days. And now it provides you with the alternative AI generated answer, but it's only one answer. I've seen cases, I've looked at it, and it's like that answer looks suspiciously wrong, and you go into diving into it, and it's sure enough. So yeah, but
one of the interesting implications of that too is there's actually, I mean, I'm curious when AI EO comes out or whatever, and people are optimizing for AI response placements, but there's a very broad form of that's already unintentionally happened, which is the model cutoff dates.
Right.
And if you look at OpenAI, I think it's September 2021. And like, I was just actually having a discussion with someone about the activity schema versus dimensional modeling, and which one an LLM can handle better. And in my experience, LLMs can natively handle dimensional modeling, but the activity schema was popularized after the cutoff date. And the gist of it was like, why would I? It's going to be tough for me to launch a new programming language or learn something new now if the previous version is answerable by ChatGPT or whatever the model is at the time. There's a strong incentive to go with the legacy versus the stuff that happened after that.
That's a good point.
I think that'll probably change. Like, I think as these models become evergreen and the training cycles reduce, or we find alternate ways for them to return information, it'll probably change. But right now, there's a funny thing that's happening with that cutoff date.
That's interesting. Speaking of data modeling, kind of switching gears a bit, like what do you think the impact of large language models is going to be on data modeling?
So I think like the first thing is it will probably get better. Mostly because, like, I think Copilot in general will actually take code quality up, because it'll take code quality down for a few people, but the general person, it will probably actually make them a little bit faster and better. And I think the same thing is kind of true of dimensional modeling, because as there's a lot of people trying to do data modeling for the first time, and they have no experience. They have no idea like where to even kind of start with doing data modeling. So at least having something that can at least, give you a path forward would be helpful for someone who's, genuinely has zero experience, who just like got hired as the one data person in a company and thinking they were going to do data science, and is now setting up an analytics stack and being like, what the heck even is this?
But that never happens, Paul. I'm just kidding.
No. They always hire the data scientists like once they have the data stack perfectly built out. That's right.
He must have learned that in ChatGPT.
Yep.
So that's an interesting point. That's a really interesting point. Like maybe Copilot would have kind of the dimensional model starter kit or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And I think we'll see in general more like tools like this. So if I was DBT, for instance, I would be trying really hard to make an LLM that's very good at making dimensional modeling easy, or like different kinds of modeling. You could even have some system prompt where you sort of point it in a direction you want to go. But now I'd be working really hard at generating that, because there's a lot of DBT that's kind of boilerplate now. Like all those like staging where you rename stuff. A lot of that is very ripe for tab.
Yeah, it seems like it. Well, Tristan's going to be on the podcast soon. Maybe I'll bring this up. So
I'm sure they're working on it. I'm sure they're working on it.
Yeah. I think it's interesting though, because it feels like the last 6-7 months or whatever has really changed the way I think people are discussing data, right? Because I think before, especially before ChatGPT, which I call that kind of the iPhone moment of
Totally.
At least large language models. I can't really say AI. Maybe it is, but I think AI is just so broad that. But definitely for generative AI, maybe right. But but it seems to be switching the discussion, right? I mean, I am writing a book on data modeling, and was about to have the thing finished by now, and then you know, I don't know. Then my thought process changed. Like, well, what is this? How do large language models impact data modeling in general? Do we need to do it? What if I just set a large language model on top of my source system and set it and forget it? Is that a good idea? And so forth. Does it mean that I don't need a data warehouse anymore, for example? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if in real time, you could just go and get that data from the respective APIs.
Yeah, if I just put it on a read replica, like maybe that's good enough. I don't know. So I mean, it got me thinking about a bunch of these issues. But then, the overarching thing I came back to was first, data modeling. I think is grossly misunderstood in especially over the last decade, especially areas like conceptual and logical modeling. Right. So conceptual modeling is the higher level modeling of the business concepts, the rules, and the processes. This is where you get, the concepts and rules you're going to apply down to the logical and then the physical models, right? Like that's. So I don't think that there's certain aspects that don't go away. For example, like I don't think that, if anything, conceptual modeling becomes more necessary because you should probably understand the concepts that you're going to be asking a large language model. That would be nice, and so yeah, it's but the discussions again, I think everyone I talk to in the data industry is basically kind of they've been thrown for a loop in some ways, right? Because it's like, okay, does this utterly change everything, or what? Or more importantly, what doesn't it change? So
yeah, totally.
It's a great question,
and I think your point about the conceptual models is spot on. Like, especially if LLMs are capable of doing a lot of the sort of rote stuff that humans used to have to do, like to pull this, pull that, do this, do that, like materialize this as a view, materialize that as a table,
right.
Like, all this kind of rote stuff that humans used to have to do. The more they're capable of that, the more it matters to be even thinking about the business process in the right way. If you're thinking about completely the wrong process and you've thrown it on a production database with some bad names that don't accurately describe the process that's happening, you're going to get crap back, and rightly so. So it's like there's extra importance on understanding the actual thing you're talking about, like as it's occurring in real life.
Yeah. Are you guys thinking oh, sorry, go on, Ryan.
I was going to say it's kind of neat to wonder, like, will a semantic layer ever actually be that, right? Like semantic. It's like, I don't know if you've seen the OpenAI plugin system, but like when you're building a plugin in the OpenAI API, you actually describe it in natural language. Mm-hmm. So like when, for example, Zillow was building their plugin, they would say, all right, then when you look at a house, when someone's searching for a house, we want to show this data back. And it's actually defined using just plain languages, which is fascinating, actually. And it's like, cool. Could that ever happen to data models as well, right? But the one thing I would say in the against camp, though, is that even if you took a very skilled human and you dropped them in front of a blank data warehouse with no context and said, hey, can you put this together and get these results or whatever, it would be difficult for a human to do without that context as well. That takes a lot of context is key. So that goes back to human in the loop, right? So like I'm interested to see what the phase 2 sort of brings, or maybe that isn't the case. But I think for the foreseeable future, it's still going to be, machine build something, human in the loop, make sure that it's, what we need, rinse and repeat. So like human in the loop, I think is key.
Yeah, it's probably more
the other convenient thing with the human in the loop, that if the number is wrong, there is someone on the hook as opposed to a sort of nebulous API.
Very true, yeah.
Well, I'll give you an example of this, right? So with my 12-year-old, he's in 6th grade, and we were so I've been trying to teach him just ChatGPT, use it, embrace it. I spoke at a 6th grade class last week. That's my keynote of the year highlight. Just about the impacts of AI on on them specifically. I think the world's going to be changing a lot, and just trying to give them a heads up on maybe what to think about. But so we use it often, and I use it on word problems, for example, right? Like we'll go through word problems. I have a math degree. I'm fully capable of solving these problems. So I'm like, one way you should check, ways of solving this is maybe put it in the ChatGPT. So we'll code it in, and what was interesting was the answers to some of the problems were mathematically wrong, right? And obviously, it looked very convincing.
Totally.
Like if you weren't paying attention, you'd say, "Yeah, that's totally the answer." And so what I did is I said, "Okay." I asked him, "Okay, so the output's wrong, and I want you to find out why."
Yeah. No, it's good. It's crucial. And then he'll actually have to learn the process for
Bingo.
going through to create the actual thing in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same thing's true of data modeling, right? It's like if you don't understand the process that's going on in the business and you're not capable of like working backwards to that to get what you want, the LLMs are just like an accelerant, right? They're just like gasoline.
Oh yeah.
It's like it's going to get you fast. It's going to get you to go fast somewhere. Whether that somewhere is somewhere you want to go or should be going in the first place is really up to you. So, you've got to understand the process.
So, I mean, with your work with large language models, are you all focused mainly on the interactions with the data in a database, or are you also looking at stuff like emails or textual information like that too, to get a broader context of the business and its language?
We're just database right now,
Database,
so
okay.
everything's on top of like SQL Warehouse.
I will say there has been a really fascinating shift that I think it's actually been a subtle one, and unless you're building a BI tool, you probably wouldn't have noticed it. But since ChatGPT came out, you hear more and more people talking about working with data, and they actually mean unstructured data. And now suddenly, documents in an ocean are data once again because these models are able to structure that unstructured data so well. So it's interesting to see that we're starting to see those lines get a little bit blurrier now. Yeah.
That's really interesting because Paul, you're at the event we did in Denver a few weeks ago, right? Yeah, obviously we chatted there as a rhetorical question. But what was interesting was Bill Inman, was chatting, right? And so he, invented the data warehouse and ETL, among a lot of other things. But it's interesting when you talk to him about the data warehouse as he originally did it with structured data. He hates talking about it, actually. It's like the last thing on his mind. Everyone wants to talk to him about it because it's like, going up to, I don't know, an old band and telling him to play the classic song. But his mind, like 20, 30 years ago, already had jumped to unstructured data, text data specifically. And that's like, so I don't know if you caught there's somebody in the audience who asked, I'm getting into, data, what should I focus on? And Bill's answer was, you should focus on text. It's everywhere. It's overwhelmingly the majority of the data that most companies have is text and other unstructured data. But, it was interesting. He had that insight, like he's telling me, back in the 90s even, but he, solving it back then was harder, for a lot of reasons, because he's not using NLP either. It's just straight up like,
just like noun frequency, like word frequency.
Yeah. It's harder, but to have that insight back then, I thought was pretty interesting because, people are still trying to figure out databases, let alone text. But no, it's absolutely right. And working with data, I mean, that's the majority of the data in most companies is it's pervasive. So,
and an immense amount of important stuff that should be documented and should be known is actually in random email threads, random Slack threads, like, not properly documented like it, probably should be. And then that leads to like a lot of sort of key person risk inside of businesses, right? It's like you have that one person who just knows how to do something and you email him, he does it. And if he leaves, it's going to be a problem.
Or he explains it to you, but it's over Slack.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And there's no one else knows how to find it. It's just one-on-one communication. So
that's the hidden context of the data is everything else that kind of surrounds it. It's just, it's like dark matter, so.
Because about the same percentages too.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, like most of the comprised universe, because it is interesting that provides the general context around the answers that aren't documented, right?
Yep.
So,
one of actually, it's funny. One of the first things that I saw, one of my first experiences with GPT was the ChatGPT 3.5 playground, where they have a bunch of demos of like what you can do, and this is before RLHF, and this is like early sort of capabilities, but. One of the first things they had in there was actually structuring unstructured data. And they had a big example of, you're in a room and there's 3 red balls and there's 2 blue balls in front of it. And in the corner, there's another. And it said make me a table of how many balls there are in red, pink, blue, and it was able to structure that even back then. So and it's only just gotten better.
Smart. Fascinating. Well, cool. I know we're coming up on time, but it's fantastic chatting with you guys. I'd love to chat more at some point, maybe over beers and climbing or whatever y'all do in Miami. Y'all are in different cities. So.
not much climbing.
No, but you have other things going on there. Yeah, it's a fun city. So cool. For people who want to learn more about both of you and Zenlytic, how can they do that?
So I'd say check us out on LinkedIn. I'm Paul Blankley. This is Ryan Janssen. And, check us out on LinkedIn. We're there. And check us out at zenlytic.com. Cool. So if what we're doing looks exciting to you, shoot us a link.
It looks exciting, so shoot them a link. All right. All right. Well, thanks guys.
Time,
yeah, thank you. Great chat. Let's talk to you all later.
Awesome.
Great chat.
Thanks.